What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be giving my reaction and review of the supernatural horror film, Black Phone 2. And just so you guys know, this video will contain mild spoilers, so if for some reason you haven't gotten around to getting to the theaters to watch this movie yet, and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. Black Phone 2 is an American-made supernatural horror film that is meant to be the sequel to the 2021 film, The Black Phone. Taking place in 1982, 4 years after the events of the first film, where we catch up with Finney Blake trying to deal with the trauma from his kidnapping by and the killing of the notorious serial killer, The Grabber. Meanwhile, his sister, Gwen, starts having terrifying visions of mutilated children and nightmares of a ringing phone. Now, this film is directed by Scott Derrickson. He was the director of the first film, from a script he co-wrote with C. Robert Cargill, and produced by Jason Blum. The film stars Ethan Hawke, Mason Thames, Madeline McGraw, and Jeremy Davies, reprising their roles, while Damien Bashir also joins the cast. The film premiered at Fantastic Fest on September 20th of 2025 and was released in the United States by Universal Pictures on October 17th. And the film has received positive reviews so far from critics. In fact, at the time of the making of this video, the movie has a 74% on Rotten Tomatoes based on 98 critic reviews, with a popcorn meter that is not yet available, but by the end of the weekend, I'm sure it will be. The film has a Metascore of 65 on Metacritic based on 38 critic reviews, with a user score of 7.0 based on 302 user ratings. And finally, the movie has a 6.7 out of 10 on IMDb with just over 2,500 ratings. So look, guys, I'm going to make a confession here. I went to see this movie without having seen the first one. Mostly because I just wasn't able to find the time. You know, sometimes life be lifing, right? And that turned out to be not such a great call, no pun intended, because as I sat through this movie, it took a minute for me to get my bearings as I was introduced to characters who had clearly already been through something traumatic that I didn't quite have a complete hold of initially. But you'll be happy to know that the first thing I did when I got back from seeing Black Phone 2 was I went and found and watched the first movie. And I did that, before I made this video in case that wasn't clear. And that was a really big help for me to contextualize what we saw in the second movie. And so here we go. Now, I thought the story here was a bit overly contrived, right? Even though the writers spend a lot of time trying to convince us that what happens in this film is just the natural evolution of the story that we're told in the first film. But the first film was deeply flawed from a narrative standpoint. Suffice it to say, I was absolutely dumbfounded by some of the things that did not happen in the first movie. For example, I understand that Finn and Gwen's dad was a drunk. It felt like that was largely brought on over the death of their mother. But when Finn is snatched, how his dad didn't put down the alcohol and take to the streets, I have to find my son. My man was sitting in a Barca lounger with the brewskis the whole movie. And the only person that was actually trying to find him was Gwen. Also, the police did a piss poor job of investigating a serial killer situation in their town. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't go, hey, look, kids, if you see a van, run the other way. If you see balloons, run the other way. This whole we're keeping those things close to the vest just didn't make a whole lot of sense. And third, them coming to the school to talk to Gwen without a parent being there was just, it just was just crazy. It was a lot of things that happened in the first movie, and I understand that those things kind of had to happen in order for the movie to go the way that it went, right? The writers of the film wanted Finn to save himself, clearly. But that's just not typically what would happen in real life, even in the 80s. How are parents letting their kids just walk around the neighborhood? Sure, you can go play basketball. Sure, you can go walk around and do this by yourself and do that by yourself with kids getting snatched all over the city. Sure, why not? It was piss poor parenting at its finest. You know what I'm saying? And but I bring all that up to say that those issues were kind of dragged into this story. So those situations were simply compounded here in this particular story. Now, thematically, I actually really like what the film had to say. The film takes aim at generational trauma, with Finn trying to literally ignore the ringing of the past, right? The phone starts ringing, and he's just like, I can't help you, hangs up the phone, he ignores it outright, right? And he's coping with his situation by way of physical violence, right? He beats the dog shit out of a boy that's much bigger than him at school. And when Gwen's like, why'd you do that? I mean, hey, buddy was looking at me crazy. You're like, dog, god dang. And of course, he's smoking a lot of pot. Essentially, he's stunting like his daddy, which makes a lot of sense to me, right? His dad was violent. Like he's beating the crap out of Gwen in the first movie. So you see the violence, that kind of existed in their household. So Finn's just kind of essentially becoming his father. In the meantime, his sister Gwen starts having prophetic dreams about 3 missing boys that are presumed dead, and decides that she has to help. So essentially, she goes from being a bystander in the first film, whereas Film was the main character, the driver of the plot, right, to being the main character in this film, a hero archetype, which is not quite what Finn was in the first film, right? I fashion him more a survivor than a hero. But the point is, I like how the writers have the siblings essentially change positions from this film from the previous film to this film. Now, I also like the fact that the story expands the conversation on faith in the afterlife. You guys know anything that's focusing on religion, I like to dig into because of the philosophical aspect of it, right? I just think that it's always a worthwhile philosophical discussion to have, even though I am a believer in Jesus Christ, and I'm a Christian. And so still, I do think that there's a worthwhile philosophical conversation to be had when we start talking about faith in the afterlife, especially since more and more people are starting not to believe in that kind of thing. But this film explicitly pits good against evil by way of the grabber's return as a demonic spirit, hell-bent on revenge from beyond the grave. Now, the film also focuses on Gwen's faith in particular and the overall purpose of her dreams, right? The fact that the siblings go to a Christian youth camp to confront the antagonist, a camp that their mother once attended, expanding on her Christian backstory and the idea of the afterlife. The missing boys being trapped in a sort of purgatory until their bodies are found and they can finally be at rest, and her mother kind of enduring the same until the truth about her death is discovered. At the end of the film, her mother talks about, it's beautiful here, blah, blah, blah. And, the boys are here with me too, blah, blah, blah. So, it's kind of, I like that the filmmakers kind of take aim at that, right? And they do it in a way that's smart because most people are just not going to like films that focus too heavily on religion these days because most people just don't have any use for it. Now, as for the grabber coming back from the grave to torment Finn and by way of Gwen, I had very mixed feelings, right? I think it was a bit too reminiscent of A Nightmare on Elm Street, a movie I grew up watching and being terrified by, right? I tell people when I was a kid, Freddy Krueger was ranked #1 in the nation, bro. Because I'm like, if you mean to tell me I can't even go to sleep, Buddy gonna get me while I'm dreaming. I don't even know what to do. You can't even run from that, right? And when you consider the fact that this movie is also set in the 80s, that just exacerbates that issue, right? And I'm not saying that you can't be inspired by a previously executed idea or even a character, because most films are that, right? But Freddy Krueger is just too iconic a villain in my mind to try to plagiarize, right? The only reason I even try to give the filmmakers the benefit of the doubt in this particular case is because there was already a supernatural element present in the first film. That, and the fact that apparently the grabber could hear the phone as well, but that instead of leaning into his abilities as a medium, he rejected them, the opposite of what Finn does, right? And that's what led him down the path to becoming a killer of children in the first place, right? As a means of rejecting their voices that he would hear in his head. Now, where the story here is concerned, the plot just plods along in rather tedious fashion, vacillating between Gwen's dreams and reality as we jump between the past, as I stated, and the more distant past, which with disconnected phones that just won't stop ringing annoyingly throughout the movie, right? I got to say something about that, right? I know this movie is called The Black Phone, right? But I'll be damned if that phone was ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing, right? And you kind of go, well, maybe that's the point, right? But here's the deal. So many times that phone rang and just nobody picked it up. And so much time is spent in this movie with just ringing phones. And I'm like, bro, answer the phone. Answer the phone. Let's go ahead and get down to the get down. Answer the phone. Right? And, my thing is just that we get about an hour into this movie before you ever even see the ghost of the grabber, right? And that's just too long. That's just way, way, way too long. This movie was right at about a 2-hour runtime. You can't go half the movie without seeing the antagonist, right? I always tell you guys that, right? If you can go half the movie without seeing the antagonist, then you don't need him. And it's not even like we didn't know that the grabber was going to be in this movie, right? I mean, in the trailers, he's all up and through it, right? So it's not like, oh, we're going to hold this as a surprise twist towards the end of the movie. Surprise, the grabber's back. No. We know that already. If we've seen the trailer, we know he's in the movie. Go ahead and get to it, right? This movie probably could have been 20 minutes shorter than it was. Just to keep it real. Just to keep it real, right? Now, speaking of Gwen, the main characters are all back for this one, and that being, Gwen and her brother, and their dad too, right? So casting was kind of preordained here, right? And the same actors play these characters that played them in the first movie. And again, seeing as how the two main characters in the first film were young child actors, who are now a bit older and now a bit more seasoned, the acting here is a bit better than it was in the previous film, right? But that's something to be expected. Now, the small writing here was a bit maddening, right? Especially Gwen's dialogue, right? And that's just a carryover from the first film, right? But I tried to remind myself that the main characters in this movie are kids. Older kids now, but still kids nonetheless. And so they talk like kids. And to add a little bit more pepper, more Lowrys than might be decided by most, because of the story's timeline, they're children in the 80s. And the reason why I bring that up is that, it's 2025. So you're showing us a movie that takes place 40 years ago and that goes and flashbacks to even times before that. So when you're listening to these people talk, it just, especially Gwen being foul-mouthed and super defiant and stuff like that, you just kind of go, it was a lot at times. I do think that the small writing was connective enough, right? Because what you're really leaning on here is not the dialogue in this movie. What you're leaning on here is the fright factor, right? The violence, the death, and that kind of thing, right? And this film really does use those flashbacks to show pretty gruesome deaths of these three boys, and that's kind of what the film is using to kind of lean on here. It's not the dialogue. So I guess I say all that to say the dialogue was good enough, but I mean it wasn't anything to write home about, if you know what I'm saying. Now, I thought the directing here was just okay, right? Though I'll admit to you guys, I didn't really appreciate the aesthetic used to convey Gwen's dream state, or the frequency with which her dreams occupied the film, right? I would say her dreams was like half the movie. And I thought that it was just heavy-handed. I get it. The movie's about her having these dreams, but it was just, in the first movie, you had a handful of them. In this movie, it was literally like half the movie. And I was just like, they're doing a lot here. But again, it's not unlike the aesthetic used in the original film. And given that Scott Derrickson directed both films, I guess it's a continuity type situation, which I guess makes it the correct choice, technically speaking. Now, overall, I'd give this film a 75% or a 7.5% if you're thinking IMDb score. Essentially a C+ for a letter grade. Look, this film isn't as unsettling as the first film, but I can't eat the filmmaker's lunch for that because it's just a matter of logistics, right? This is primarily because in the first film, the grabber was a flesh and blood serial killer who had kidnapped Finney, planning to kill him after he had killed several other kids in the area, right? And here, he's basically a figment of the main character's imagination, reminiscent, again, of a certain someone who used to terrify children in Springwood, Ohio in the mid to late 80s. And I say all that to say, again, while I applaud the film for its thematic prowess, using the horror of child abduction to explore resilience in the face of trauma, as well as the power of family and connection, I ultimately found the film too derivative. And not even of the previous film, but like I said, of A Nightmare on Elm Street. And I thought that was just too prominent a classic horror story for me to just completely let go. I think you could have set the film in modern day times and modernized it a little bit. I think that would have gone a long way to help the film. I'm not really sure if The Grabber is based on an actual serial killer in Denver, and that's why it was just so important that this movie be set in the 80s. Because I feel like if you had set this movie in the 2020s, for example, I think it would have yielded a slightly better result. I was also just much too annoyed by the phone, even though I understand that that was a central piece of the storytelling. And, you know, the phone was a plot device, right? That said, if you like the first film, then you'll probably like this one as well. I think that this film will end up with a similar Rotten Tomatoes rating as the first one. It'll probably end up doing similar numbers at the box office as well. And that lends me to think that there'll probably be another film that we'll get here in the coming years, especially if they can get the two, Gwen and Finn, the actors that play Gwen and Finn, to come back, right? And in my opinion, that'll probably be the one, at least for me, that officially jumps the shark. But what do you guys think? Have you had a chance to go see Black Phone 2 yet? If you have, how do you think the film compared to the previous one? What did you think about the plot and its pacing? What did you think about the newest supernatural element present in this particular film, with the Grabber being able to now come back from the grave to torment Gwen and Finn? Did you find it to be too derivative of A Nightmare on Elm Street? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also now support the channel by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, feel free to subscribe to my new shorts channel and my reactions channel for additional content. Links are in the description. In addition to that, be sure to go and check out themadScreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. And I'll catch y'all on the next video.